How can Donald Trump complain about voter fraud? There's no voter fraud that goes on. Really? No. Watch. So go over and watch. And watch carefully. So go to your place and vote, and go pick some other place and go sit there with your friends and make sure it's on the up and up. And you got to watch your polling booths, because I hear too many stories about Pennsylvania, certain areas.
Some voters in critical battleground states are facing some trouble at the polls, but they're not Trump supporters. In Ohio, a U.S. district judge issued a temporary restraining order on Friday against the Trump campaign and GOP operative Roger Stone to prevent any attempts to harass or intimidate voters. On Tuesday, the Trump campaign is appealing the order. In North Carolina, the NAACP sued the state on Monday for purging thousands of primarily black voters from the rolls if their residence was challenged. But on Friday, a U.S. district judge ruled that the purges were illegal and ordered the state to restore the voters. The DOJ is sending election monitors to 4 North Carolina counties for Tuesday's vote. And joining me now is Dale Ho, director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project, and Judith Browne Dianis, executive director of the Advancement Project. Thank you both for being here. I want to go through with you first, Judith, and I want to give you 4 examples of what North Carolina is like in 2016. First thing, North Carolina has been found to have violated the motor voter law because many people who tried to register at their Department of Motor Vehicles were simply left off the rolls. Item number 2, a reward newspaper ad. The Reverend Dr. William Barber sent us this yesterday. It's an ad showing a reward, quote unquote, for anyone caught doing voter fraud, in-person voter fraud, which we know doesn't exist. Item number 3, a North Carolina judge, a district judge, about their voter purge, said this sounds like something that was put together in 1901. That's what she told lawyers in the state. And lastly, I want to play a soundbite from Dallas Woodhouse. He's the executive director of the North Carolina Republican Party. He's the guy who sent around that memo telling the local voter, DMVs to do what you need to do that's pro-Republican. This was him talking to our very own Hallie Jackson on MSNBC on Thursday. Take a listen.
We don't have a suppression vote problem in North Carolina. The Democrats have a depression problem. And you know why? It's very simple. Their candidate could have these on Inauguration Day.
Judith, that's the attitude of the North Carolina Republican Party displayed on our air this week. What do you make of what's happening in North Carolina?
Well, you know, North Carolina, we know, is a real battleground state, and many people are saying the outcome comes down to North Carolina. So what that means is that partisan operatives have to do whatever they can and go to whatever extent they can to make it harder to vote for particular voters. And those are African-American voters. And so they are really conjuring up all of the kinds of intimidation and threats that they can so that they can scare people away from the polls or make it harder for them to vote by taking them off the rolls. So this is the kind of trickery that we're going to see because they're desperate. And instead of just letting Americans go to the polls and have their say, they would rather engage in these tactics which are against the law. And that's one of the silver linings of this election cycle, is that we are seeing voting rights lawyers winning in the courts on behalf of voters.
And Dale, speaking of intimidating voters, I want to show you a tweet. This is something called Bikers for Trump that claims that they are deploying, quote, poll watchers. They're raising money. They want to raise $25,000. Their hashtags include lock her up, Hillary for prison, etc. You've seen stories like this, people showing up with guns on their hip at polling places attempting to scare Democratic voters. Is any of that even legal?
Well, I think this is the natural consequence of these very thinly veiled calls for racial profiling at the polls. We've seen people at campaign events tell reporters they're going to engage in racial profiling on Election Day. There was one person who told the Boston Globe, I'm going to look for Mexicans, Syrians. He actually used the expression racial profiling. He's going to get behind people and make them nervous. Now, this is not legal. Federal law prohibits voters, and we just had the temporary restraining order in Ohio that prohibits the Trump campaign and Roger Stone's group from questioning voters about their qualifications under the guise of exit polling that they tried to frame it as, or distributing information about voter fraud at the polls. So it's a problem.
Yeah, and you have examples in Arkansas, a Republican election commissioner intimidating voters. His name was Stu Soffer, showing up and yelling, "Shut up and go home" to early voters. You have white nationalists claiming that they plan to go and distribute weed and alcohol in African-American communities to try to suppress the vote. The idea that people can actually show up at a polling place with a gun, yell at people as they're voting, is it legal to be on the property of a voting location and do that?
Well, the states do let people act as certified poll monitors as long as you're working with a campaign and you're certified by the campaign and that you're trained and that you adhere to all laws governing poll monitors. Now, what you're not allowed to do is just sort of randomly show up at the polls and start questioning voters about their qualifications, or what Donald Trump has called for, which is for people to, in certain parts of Pennsylvania, to go to other parts of Pennsylvania, and we know exactly what he's talking about when he says that. He's actually asking people to violate the law, because in Pennsylvania, you can only be a certified poll monitor in a county where you are a registered voter. So you can't go from rural western Pennsylvania to Philadelphia.
Right. And Judith, you know, we know that there is a restraining order on the Republican National Committee because of voter suppression in the past. You now have a judge who has issued a temporary restraining order in Ohio against the Trump campaign, as we have just discussed earlier. Could the Republican National Committee be in violation of the consent decree because of Trump supporters doing these kinds of voter intimidation, or the Trump campaign doing it?
Well, Joe, I think the court is going to have to find whether or not the RNC actually conspired with those operatives and with the state parties. In 2004, Vansa Project sued the RNC. Actually, in that particular case, we went back to court there because we found that they were working together and conspiring with the state party. So I think that's going to be part of the evidence. But, you know, the big problem here is that these operatives and these state parties are out there doing things that violate the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and it's illegal, and Trump has got to stop it.
Yeah, well, I wish we had a fully realized Voting Rights Act that could do something about that, but, you know, there we go. All right, Dale Ho, Judith, Browne, Dianis, thank you both for being here. Appreciate